Good morning. I didn't get a chance to say earlier that my name is Linda Tucker, pastor here at the church. And today is All Saints Sunday, so later we'll see a video of all the ones that have passed away in the last year. So our scripture today reflects that focus. It's Hebrews chapter 12. It says, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and the sin that clings so closely, and let us run with perseverance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith, who for the sake of the joy that was set before him endured the cross, disregarding its shame, and has taken his seat at the right hand of the throne of God." So my son this week said something that really shocked me. He's really kind of got a brain for language, and he just said out of the blue, we were walking one day, and he said, there's a connection between anticipation and nostalgia. I think I stopped in my tracks, and I was like, okay, what do you mean by that? He said, well, they're the same thing, just one's in the past and one's in the future. I don't know, but that sounds like a profound thing for a 10-year-old to say. So I just had to kind of absorb that for a minute because it's not something I had ever really thought of before either. Anticipation is about something in the future, and nostalgia is about that in the past. So anticipation, you're excited about something that's coming up, looking forward to it, longing. And nostalgia, of course, is that sentimental longing or yearning for something in the past. Now, I thought that this was really a gift that Will had given me since I was working on my All Saints sermon. And I kind of connected with the focus of, or his mentioning, nostalgia. So I want to talk a minute about those two things, and some of the ways that churches have used both of those words, maybe things that are not necessarily helpful. So religious anticipation, especially around All Saints, sometimes puts the afterlife and the glories of heaven as that anticipation, that longing. And sometimes it's so great that it's a bit overwhelming. I, for one, have relatives that if there's a problem in their life at all, in the world or in their life, they'll say, well, it's going to be better one day. And it's going to be nothing but pearly gates and, gold, and my crown is going to be, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And so they're anticipating heaven in kind of a way that's really not helpful, because whatever was happening in that moment is gone, and their need to focus on that present moment was overtaken by their anticipation of some future reward in heaven. So that's one way that religion has used the word anticipation in sort of a negative way. It's not something I participate in. I find it frustrating, actually. So that's just one of my difficulties with anticipation, the way it's used in religion. Nostalgia, on the other hand, has a very similar effect. I've heard people talk about, when it'll occur at the same time. They'll be frustrated about something, worried about something. Maybe it's in their life, maybe it's in the world, and they will look in the past instead of the future. They will look in the past and say, it used to be, and they will remember some glory day when that particular issue was not the same way. And of course, our memories are not accurate. The past was never, ever perfect, right? But in their description of it, in nostalgia, it turns to just all glorious and wonderful. And you could, at times, feel like they were describing some heavenly place when everybody got along and things were perfect. So sometimes religion tends to use both of those tools about anticipation and nostalgia in difficult ways, difficult for us and are not necessarily helpful. In fact, there's really no way to set the clock back. Some people really spend a lot of time researching early church history, like when the times right after Jesus died, that must have been the time, because it was so close to Jesus, when Christianity was better. It was, Jesus had just passed away. Surely they had more wisdom than we have now. So there's quite a lot of research on early church history and trying to get back to that kind of Christian knowledge. But we can't turn the clock back. There's no way to do that. All Saints Sunday is really not an attempt to turn the clock back. It's also not an anticipation of a heavenly reward. It is us trying to grapple with both of those things. How can we draw wisdom? How can we draw wisdom from anticipation and nostalgia? The Bible tells us that we can find wisdom through this image of the cloud of witnesses. It's really a powerful image and a strong image in our Christian tradition, this cloud of witnesses that we as people of faith, we are not creating what we do here. We come standing on a long tradition. We also don't have to worry about the future as much as if we were just creating it, because we have instruction. We can get instruction on what to do about the future. So all of that is encompassed in this word, cloud of witnesses. Now, I had a professor in college one time that said, it was a history class, and he said something that just kind of broke into my brain, and I have never forgotten it. We were studying ancient history. I think it was probably 3,000 or 4,000 year old history. And he turned to us and he said, people then were just like people now. And what I mean by that is they were physically like we are, and they had the same brain capacity that we have today. What he was getting at is that we tend to think that people were not as smart as we are. And they were. The advantage that we have is that we have this accumulated history to where we are today. That's why we live the way we do and have the advantages that we have. It's because we have accumulated history. And so, in some sense, we have that in religious faith. We have this accumulated history of Jesus had it. Jesus had it from the Jewish tradition, and now we have it from all the Christian tradition. We have this accumulated history, and the church that we have today is not the same church that the early church had because of all of this that we have learned over time. Now, I'm not saying this in an effort to be nostalgic about our past, but in an attempt to use the past to figure out where we're going to go in the future, to anticipate something new in the future. Recently, I came across someone that really had a real grasp of this, reaching for the past to know what to do in the future. His name was Don Elias San Pedro. That's a Spanish name. I came across his name when I was walking the Camino de Santiago. Yes, I'm talking about that again. I came across his name because his life is legendary for the Camino. He lived his whole life somewhere on the Camino. He started off, he grew up in Sarria, which is a town that's about 100 kilometers from Santiago. It's an important town because if you're it's the minimum amount you can walk from to get a certificate of completion, 100 kilometers. And so he grew up there in that town, and then he became a priest. And he was appointed the priest to the town of Osobrero, which is also on the Camino. It is a town that is one of the highest peaks on all of the Camino. And it's a very historical town. It has all these thatch roofs, really gorgeous town. And so while he was in seminary, he wrote several papers about the history of the Camino, because he was from Syria. And then he was appointed to Osumbrero. And there it was, the Camino again, walking through his life. And so he wrote even more articles about the history of the Camino and had them published. Well, what's interesting is he was appointed there around the time of, in 1972, he was appointed there, and in 1972, only 2 people registered as pilgrims at Santiago. So that means only 2 people that year walked the Camino that year. So it had declined. He was researching, doing all this research, and it had declined to so much that only 2 people. This is a historic route that millions of people had walked before. In the Middle Ages, they guessed that 500,000 people walked a year to Santiago across Europe. And so anyway, he was doing all this research and writing all these papers in a time when he did not see pilgrims. Only 2 had passed through, when it was just a grasping for the past. It was just historical research. But he started really trying to figure out a way to make these historical documents, these historical articles he was writing, more relevant to the time. And this is why he is legendary. He went from town to town to town on the French Way, which is the most popular way, and he started organizations in those towns to clean up the Camino, to make it more obvious. And he got some yellow paint and just simply started marking it with an arrow, a yellow arrow, all the way from Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port all the way to Santiago. And he single-handedly painted yellow arrows all the way to Santiago. So not only did he bring awareness of the ancient route, he started organizations to have them clean up the route, and then he also started marking the route. Well, once in Roncesvalles, which is really, it's the very first town on the Camino once you cross over into Spain. So you start in France, you cross over the Pyrenees, and you come to this amazing town in Roncesvalles. And the legend has it that someone came upon him with a can of spray paint, yellow spray paint. And they said, "What are you doing, Don Elias?" And he said, "I am preparing for an invasion from France." Now, this is the time when only 2 people were walking the Camino. 2 people that year walked the Camino. So by the time he passed away, he did not see the full revitalization that the Camino has now. This year, it's expected to have 300,000 people walk the Camino. I mean, I'm still shocked at that in 1972 there were only 2, and it was almost dead. It was almost out of people's memory. So I think, in my mind, he's just a perfect example of how you can reach to the past and make it really clear how what we do in faith is important, even drawing yellow arrows. Make it really clear how to do it, where it goes, and dream about what it could be. That's what we mean when we talk about cloud of witnesses. We have this sense of anticipating and honoring and reaching these goals that were begun so long ago. In our culture, one of the biggest problems that people have is that they feel alone. One of the wisdoms we have as Christians is to know that we are not alone. That is a wisdom that we can give someone today with this image of cloud of witnesses. Now, I noticed when Frankie was singing one of those beautiful songs that several people were tearing up. And it was very touching to think about, maybe their grandfather or someone that passed away. We don't do well with thinking about the past. What a gift we can give to people to say, you can look at the past and glean from it a sense of presence. Now, I'm not saying that there are spirits in this room with this cloud of witnesses. If you think of it that way, that's fine. But to me, it's a beautiful, metaphorical, poetic way of describing this sense of history that we live with as Christians and that we can also draw from. So it can even spark us to dream about what to do next. Now, this is not something we just do on All Saints Sunday. Every single Sunday, we talk about the life of Jesus. Every single Sunday, we pick that person out of this cloud of witnesses and say, now this person, Jesus, could be a model for our life. There's something about the life of Jesus that can teach us and make us know that we're not alone. So when I say we're not alone, it's not a regular exercise for us to look into the past, but I want to challenge you to do this. I want you to think about the people in your life. Perhaps it is Jesus. Think about the people from your past that have been important and ask, what is it that they're wanting to communicate to you? I regularly think about my grandmother. My grandmother was incredibly important in my childhood. She was a saint on this earth, a beautiful woman. And when I think of her, I get this flood of love, affirmation, appreciation. The people that have gone before are wanting to, there is a message that you can still receive from them. There's nothing wrong with allowing yourself to be open to that message. It grounds us to anticipate what to look forward to. That's why every single Sunday is truly an All Saints Sunday. We look back to what Jesus did in his life, that message for us today to know what we're to do for the future. It really is that simple. So next we're going to see a video. Kimberly's going to come and sing one of my favorite songs. I know I say that all the time. Kimberly's going to come and sing a favorite song of mine. But it does have that sense of remembering, of nostalgia. Allow yourself to experience that with a sense of, what is the message for my life? What is it that I'm supposed to use that for in the future? And as we're listening, we're going to have a video of and honoring those that have passed away in the last year.